Hello and welcome to the third part of the Progressives and TR lecture videos. Today we're going to be looking at the presidency of William Howard Taft as well as the election of 1912. And then tomorrow we will be looking at the presidency of Woodrow Wilson, and that will wrap up the videos for this unit. So at the end of Teddy Roosevelt's second term, he claims that he will not run for a third term. Now, it's not a law yet that a president can only have two terms. However, that is still the precedent that was set by George Washington, and so that's the precedent that everybody has followed. He decides that he's going to pick his successor, and as his successor, Teddy Roosevelt chooses the 300-pound Secretary of War, William Howard Taft. And I've decided to include the image in this slide that I have. It is during a photo shoot that Taft was having. He received a phone call where he was told by somebody, I don't know if it was Teddy Roosevelt himself or if he was being told by someone, some aide, but he was, as this photograph was taken, he was being informed that he had been nominated to become president of the United States. And just look at how happy he is. Look at that smile. I just think that's a wonderful photograph. He's very, you can see he's happy. He's been told that he's going to be nominated for the presidency. So not really too much to discuss in that. In the election of 1908, again, the Republican Party nominates William Howard Taft. The Democratic Party nominates William Jennings Bryan. We've talked about him in the last unit. Kind of at the end, we talked about our populists. He was the man on the docket. And Taft wins the election. So Taft's presidency comes in, and he has an issue with the high tariffs that were placed on goods that were coming into the United States, and the issue was that these tariffs are raising prices for all consumers. And now a tariff is a tax on foreign goods, and the intention of a tariff is to make domestic products much cheaper to buy. Currently, as I'm speaking, I know there is an issue in the modern day with President Trump with his increasing tariffs on Chinese products and causing a trade war. But there's a little bit of a historical connection, or a modern day connection, you could say, in that we're still, trying to deal with tariffs and the related issues. The tariff that was kind of passed was the Dingley tariff, and the point was that it lowered many tariff prices on various goods entering the country. So trying to lower those prices for consumers, as well as the Payne-Aldrich tariff, which did similar things. Additionally, he signed the Mann-Elkins Act of 1910, which extended the powers of the Interstate Commerce Commission to cover telephone, telegraph, cable, and wireless companies. So he's kind of expanding the ICC to more digital, not really digital, but more, we'll say digital types of communication. So telephones, telegraph, their reach extends to telephones as well, and I'm sure eventually it will be computers. The return of Teddy Roosevelt. After Taft wins, Teddy Roosevelt goes on vacation to Africa to engage in hunts and safaris. And while he was gone, Taft began aggressively trust busting. And he began busting more trusts than Teddy Roosevelt did, believe it or not. And he eventually emerges from the jungle, quote unquote, and he's very upset at the fact that Taft is busting all of these trusts. Because Teddy was upset because he's like, no, you're not discriminating against good and bad trusts. He's saying you're just getting rid of all the trusts. We can't do that. You need to keep some of these because they're vital to the function of the country. But Taft was just going after all trusts. And so he's like, no, Teddy's like, no, I don't like this. I disagree. So he decides to re-enter the world of politics. And so he announces he's going to reform the country again under something called New Nationalism. And New Nationalism basically entails the strict regulation of large corporations and more protections of women and children in the workplace, and as well as keeping some of the good trusts, so he believes. And so, as I mentioned, TR begins to move against Taft in the political realm, as Taft had brought charges against 45 different trusts under the Sherman Antitrust Act. One of these was U.S. Steel, and during their investigations, it was revealed that Teddy Roosevelt had an involvement with the U.S. Steel in their takeover of the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company, and this exposure was interpreted by Teddy Roosevelt as a personal attack against him, and so he believed that Taft was unwisely going after good trusts and not discriminating between good and bad. But what did Taft do during his presidency? Well, he did a couple other things too besides just busting trust. He set over 1 million acres of forest in the Appalachians aside for national reserves. He preserved coal, oil, and other resources in the ground and public lands that have been sold to private buyers, so saying that you buyers cannot go and dig up the resources, we need to save them for later. He also reformed the Postal Service so that it would better send letters to people in small towns, better serve small towns. He also separated the Department of Commerce and Labor into two different departments. So now we have the Department of Commerce and the Department of Labor. He decided that needs to be differentiated. Additionally, New Mexico and Arizona were admitted to the Union in 1912. And additionally, Taft sponsored the 16th Amendment, which reformed income tax. So he's been keeping himself busy. He hasn't been sitting back and waiting for things to happen. So now here we come to 1912. The election of 1912. So basically the Republican convention happens, and Taft winds up dominating the floor and wins the Republican nomination. And because of this, many progressives walk out in anger, and they're quite upset that Taft won because they kind of wanted Teddy Roosevelt to get elected. So what happens is these people rally around Teddy and ask him to run for president under a new party. And so then after a few weeks after the Republican convention, the Progressive Party is founded, and they nominate Teddy Roosevelt as a candidate for president. This party eventually became known as the Bull Moose Party, and it was called this because Teddy claimed to have been as healthy as a bull moose. It's a famous instance where you've seen this in the biographics episode, but Teddy Roosevelt was about to give a speech as part of this, as part of his campaign, and a man jumped out of the bushes and shot him in the chest. And before the security tackled the man to the ground and dragged him away, Teddy said, "I'm going to go keep giving the speech." So he gets up. The bullet's still in him. He's been shot. And he starts the speech by saying, "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you know this, but I've just been shot. However, I have no intention of not giving this speech, because it takes more than that to stop a bull moose." So that's kind of his where that name comes from. So the Bull Moose Party was largely progressive, and it was staffed by progressives, and some of their platforms were the idea of having more direct democracy, in that the people directly elect their representatives, not having to go through electors or committees or anything like that. They also wanted to reform labor laws to add more minimum wages for children and outlaw child labor. Additionally, they wanted to revise the tariffs and change them to better fit what they wanted to do. They also wanted a closer regulation of interstate commerce as well. So they said we need to be very closely and strictly regulating railroads and other companies that are conducting interstate commerce. So after the dust settles from all the conventions and elections and electors, the Democratic Party nominates Woodrow Wilson as their candidate. The Republican Party nominates William Howard Taft as their candidate. And the Progressive Party nominates Theodore Roosevelt as their candidate. Now, interesting thing about Wilson, he had once been the dean of Princeton University in Princeton, New Jersey, and he's also currently the governor of New Jersey as well. His kind of big claim to fame was that he was known for reforming the school's institutions, and he also called for a moral revival in the United States. Interestingly, if you ever, and we're going to later on in the next unit and during World War I look at some Wilson political cartoons, he's often portrayed as a school teacher or as a graduate, like with the graduation hat and a robe on, because they're trying to draw to his past as being the dean of students at Princeton. That's kind of what they're trying to refer to. And now, during the election, Taft does not really seem to have much in terms of support. And so it really kind of comes down to Roosevelt versus Wilson. And I want to take a minute here to compare the two of them. So both of them are progressives, but they're a little bit different in the way they want to progress. So Roosevelt talks about new nationalism. And what he means is that he wants the abolishment of individualism in industry. Rather, he wants to strictly regulate business and ensure the well-being of all Americans. And so what he's saying is we need to have a removal of this survival of the fittest mentality, in the sense of, this big company is big and it's successful, but this small company is going to go out of business because the big company is more fit. And he's like, no, we can't have that. We need to have it so that it's more equal. And Wilson talks about something called new freedom. And what he means with new freedom is that is a little bit less strict in that the government should be an umpire between business and labor. So they should be the method in which they kind of look at the negotiations and say, oh, that's not right. Oh, that's right. Okay, that's fine. You guys can do that. And they're kind of, moderating the discussions. He also demands that both business and labor are free from the control of monopolies. So he's saying we don't want monopolies in business or labor. We don't want a union that's too big or too international, or having one union for the entire country. Wilson also supports the growth of competition in business, and his kind of big quote was that new freedom will look after the men on the make rather than the men already made. And so what he's trying to say is that with new freedom, we're looking at people who are building themselves up, but the people who are already built up will be able to be where they are and maintain equilibrium there. We're trying to help more people get to be at that equilibrium point, is what he's trying to say there. And so a little bit of I sort of picture the election. Wilson winds up winning when he loses the popular vote, because most progressives wind up voting for either Roosevelt or Wilson. And this is the reason why third-party candidates are so unpopular is this election. Because if you notice, you see most of the votes went to Wilson. A very large number of, a decent number of states voted for Teddy Roosevelt, pictured in green, and Taft only won 2 states. However, I don't have the numbers with me right now, but if you were to look at the numbers, a large number of states that went to Wilson, if you look at the number of people who voted for Republican or TR, there's a good chance that those people say, alternate history here, say Teddy Roosevelt doesn't get the primary and just walks away and says, oh well, he would never have done that. That's not in his character, but say he does. Or say Teddy Roosevelt wins the Republican nomination. I think this scenario would become more likely if he won the Republican nomination. But so say the election is only Roosevelt versus TR, or no, Roosevelt versus Wilson, because TR won the nomination and Taft isn't in there at all, then we see that these votes for progressives and Republicans, if they were combined, because those voters would have voted Republican instead of voting progressive because there would have been no progressive party, we find that those votes would have added up to be able to beat Wilson's numbers in the election. So Teddy would have found himself winning a large number of states, or the Republicans would have found themselves winning a large number of states in this election, and maybe we could have seen Teddy Roosevelt get a third term, or we would have seen Taft get a second term, but it's very likely that we would not have seen Wilson win if there had been a solidarity within the Republican Party. And this is an interesting theory, because imagine how different it might have been in the future, because it's 1912. World War I starts in 1914. The United States does not get involved until 1918, 1917, that very, very late war year. If Teddy Roosevelt had been president, there's a very good chance we could have probably jumped into that war right when it started and not have come in later when we did. That actually winds up being during the second election for his second term in 1916, I believe. Wilson's big campaign slogan is, "He kept us out of war." And that's what he winds up winning on, is because people decide they don't want to get involved in this war. So that's an interesting little thing. Good comparison as well. You probably could notice you have Teddy Roosevelt running for a third term, and then later on you have his relative Franklin Delano Roosevelt wind up serving 4 terms as president. So a little bit, the Roosevelts seem to like to have a little bit more than you're technically supposed to as president, but hey, little kind of funny there. So this concludes my video for today. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Tomorrow we will be looking at the presidency of Woodrow Wilson and some of the acts that he passed domestically. And then we will also be looking at the takeaways, and then that will be the end of this series of videos for the unit. Our next series of videos will have to do with American imperialism. So with this unit, we've been looking at the kind of progressive era in terms of the 1890s up until about 1912, the beginning of World War I, roughly at home, domestically, saying this is what's going on domestically. But then the next unit we're going to be looking at what's going on abroad in terms of how is the U.S. interacting with the larger world as a whole during this time period as well. So there's a lot of layers, and it's going to be very interesting to look at as we go on. So with that being said, I hope you guys all have a good day. Take care, and I'll see you next time.